Last week, as you might remember, we discussed data analysis from a simple exercise that we had conducted using uh, a a little bit of an experiment with eights and nines. And you might recollect this is how our data looked like. So this is typically how the detection data is organized or is used for the analysis purpose. Now, what you need to look carefully here is, yeah, what you need to look carefully here is that in case of occupancy, broadly speaking, there are three data sets that you're looking at. One is, of course, the very detection or non-detection of a species of interest. You all might remember these NAs represent a person or a survey not being conducted. So the survey of cell B3 was not conducted by observer 13 and so on. So this is what it represents. You might also recollect we discussed how even one NA, if you mistype it as a 0 or vice versa, it causes massive implications on your estimates. Coming back to it, this is the detection data, how it looks like. This is the data of how those spatial covariates which might affect the probability of 8 using or not using a sampling unit are listed. Uh, it's a very simple table. You just have sites and then you start listing whichever those covariates are. These covariates do not change value within the sampling unit. They remain constant during the survey, so they don't change within the sampling unit, or they also don't change during the sampling as well. So these remain constant during your season that you have surveyed. And lastly, we listed the detection covariates in a way that each survey of each site could have a unique value of a covariate affecting the detection. In this case, for each site, each survey had a unique value of these three covariates that we looked at. That was one way of dealing with it. In case you're using presence software, then you might as well be able to, you have three separate tables and they can be imported within the presence software. So this is where we were until last week. Now the problem is that you will never, or almost never, be in a situation that the data from the field will come like this. The data comes in a completely different format, at least how you're collecting it in the field. And I'll just give you two very simple examples, and based on those examples we can see what are the best practices to collect data, organize them in a certain format so that transforming them for a presence compliant format is not that difficult. Now, the first example we're going to review here is where this is typically how sign surveys look like. In this case, a surveyor is, that's where the snow leopard's leaving scrapes. And you might plan some surveys, and each segment can be defined as whatever, half a kilometer, 1 kilometer. That totally depends on what length is optimal in your case. But once you have collected the data, what you do end up with is you end up collecting some information along each of these grids. Now, typically, this is how a sign survey data is collected. You might have a data sheet and you might walk, and at every certain point after a certain distance or during the segments that you're traversing, you might need to collect some information if you see a scrape or a sign of snow leopards or any of the species of your interest. Now, as I mentioned, you would have noticed that the data isn't really collected in the format in which we want to use it. Now, this is the data form which was developed for the survey which I mentioned about, which was conducted in Mongolia. Across Mongolia, sign surveys were conducted to estimate snow leopard distribution map. And this was how the data sheet looked like. If you look at it carefully, you will see there are several interesting and very useful tidbits in the form itself. It looks a little cluttered, but once you get a hang of it, you'll realize it's very simple. It's just kind of super annotated to make sure information isn't missed by a large number of observers who are out in the field. So, for example, if you look carefully here, the observer name over here, then you have grid name, you have date. Now, grid name is important because you need to know which survey this particular data belongs to. Within that grid, there might be transects, and there will be specific tracks and segments of your transects. Each segment, so this particular data form represents one transect segment, which could be, I think in Mongolia, it was considered to be about 1 kilometer length. I could be wrong. It was probably half kilometer or 1 kilometer. Whatever was the length that was chosen, this one form denoted that one segment. If in a survey across the country, if you've done uh, 10 segments in each grid, then 10 sheets represent one grid, and then you will have multiple grids of representing the whole study area. But it's if you look carefully, what kind of a sign you are seeing is a very important information, because many of you would know that even with a species such as snow leopard, it's not always easy to detect or to be able to recognize the scat, the species based on the scat or a certain marks. Scrapes are typically considered to be most convenient or most accurate in terms of species ID, but it's really important to identify what all information or what all little data can cause error. And if you put that together, then it's then later usable as a covariate which might affect your detectability, whether the segment or the part of the segment was on a ridge or was it in a canyon, whether it was a slope or was it in a wide valley. All those little details go into this little form, and time start, time end. So this is technically how you collect the data. Now, what happens is once you have collected the data, you might see that this is a completely different format than what we need to enter on presence. But if you look at it carefully, all you need to do is the same data that we were seeing on a data form. Here you have this is a particular uh, this is a series of several segments in a grid put together, compiled together. Now, in one over here, this, because it's a single segment. If you saw snow leopards once or you saw them 5 times, it'll still be one, because it's a single segment. It's just one of the multiple segments that we are looking at, and that's why we will be looking at the data also represents specifically that. So the starting latitude, longitude, ending latitude, longitude, and then these are specific values of those potential covariates that are likely to have affected people's ability to detect or miss a snow leopard. And then you have transect segment, somewhere there was transect length, there is the transect length, and so on. So you see these segment, this particular set represents a detection or non-detection using scrapes and scats in the first grid cell. This represents the second grid cell, and this represents the third grid cell. It's perfectly fine to have your data organized like this in the starting, because then to transform this into a detection history is a very simple thing. You can do it in R. You can even do it using pivot table in Excel if need be. But that's basically how you collect and enter the data for a science survey in a certain habitat. Now, the other data collection form we will review today is that Muzaffar, who's also a participant here, he used. And it would have been great for him to be able to present this part, but unfortunately, he's been called for a very complicated government duty. I think I just saw him pop up in the meeting. He said that he'll come in and go out. So there we are. Now, what Muzaffar did, Muzaffar collected data in a slightly different way. He collected the same occupancy level data, but instead of him having to survey each of those grids physically, for various reasons, there were challenges there. There was lack of resources, manpower, and also other constraints given the area where Muzaffar is working. What he did was he went out interviewing people. Now, what you basically are doing is, imagine this is a grid cell where snow leopards, which several snow leopards use over time. Now, there are people who either camp there or live there. There is a there's a very good chance that if a person is living very or is using an area which isn't far from where or which has snow leopards or any species of interest, there is a reasonable chance that the person may or may not see it. Now, it's the same situation that if you're walking a transit, you may or may not see the scrapes of a snow leopard. So in this case, what Muzaffar did, he did the same. He used the same methods as Abhishek and Julia Taubman used earlier. He went out with a clean um, sheet, sort of a few, and then he started asking people. Now, these people became his surveyors, uh, as they are the people who, so he would ask them, which area do you use? They would say that, okay, I use this part of the landscape. And then he asked them, have you seen a snow leopard in the last 1 year or so? Have you seen a snow leopard in the last 20 years ago or something? And then he identified these landmark moments in time which people were able to report back about. And then people started reporting, yes. So this first person, for example, he says, yes, I have seen a snow leopard here. The other person he met, he said, yeah, I've also seen a snow leopard here. Then he met a third person. He said, no, I've never seen a snow leopard there. Now, what it clearly means is the third person, for some reason, is just not has just not detected the snow leopard, because the snow leopard is living in that area. It's just a matter of chance with which that third person hasn't detected the snow leopard. And then he would say, no, I haven't seen it. The fourth person said, yes, I have seen it. And the fifth again said, I haven't seen it. What it would give us is a detection function, that a detection history that we've just been talking about last time, which will look something like this. What has happened here is the first person is here. This is the second person. This is the third person. This is the fourth person. And this is the fifth person. Now, for each grid, let's say this grid is called A1. So I have now data from A1 about people being able to detect or not detect snow leopards. Not just this year. If I'm able to get information about past, I can even add that information as well. So what you then do is you make use of the locally available knowledge, or the local knowledge in that area which exists, to be able to make some assessments about species distributions. And this is a fairly widely used method. There are certain challenges that you may sometimes face, but there are ways to deal with it as well. Now, here's another form that the last form I showed was for the sign surveys. This is the form that Muzaffar created for his survey. And thank you, Muzaffar, for sharing your data form and also a few maps to show here. But if you look carefully, there are several elements to this form. I'm showing right now the first element, which is about the attributes of the interviewee. Now, this is a very important set of information because it may govern how good or bad a person's recall would be having detected or not detected a snow leopard. Now, people who are herders are more likely to see a snow leopard than people who are, let's say, school teachers. School teachers might just be going to a school and coming back. They may not have much interest, but herders, they spend so much time out in the mountains. So, for the same area of coverage, just your profession might define how much more likely you could be to see or not see snow leopards. Similarly, there were other factors: age, gender, occupation, community, and how long have you been using this area, because that also defines your habituality or um, your uh, your your knowledgeability about the area as well. And in this case, let's say this person said that these are the grids that he uses. So Muzaffar made a mark on a map at the same time saying that these are the area which define a person, the interviewee's area of knowledge. And then he went to the second level where he started asking questions about species distributions, species detections. And this is where he asked if people had seen a snow leopard or a common leopard. People said, yeah, they had seen common leopard in these 3 units. And the same person said that he had also seen a snow leopard in this maybe a year ago or sometime during a certain period that he asked them about. Now that becomes our detection data. What happens here is every little grid which hasn't reported a detection becomes a zero. For that person, let's say this person's name is Riaz. Mr. Riaz has been interviewed right now. Now, for Mr. Riaz, he has not surveyed grid number 37, but Riaz has surveyed these grids, and in these grids he has ended up with a zero. He has also surveyed this grid, but here he has ended up with a one. Now you look at it carefully. What you do is each person is surveying more than one sampling unit here, and in some cases you might have very large grids where people may not be representing more than a part of a grid. In some areas, you might be having small grids where people might be representing larger areas within the grid cell. Both approaches are fine as long as you are clearly able to demarcate what is the area of knowledge of a person, which means that's where they are surveying it. And then in that area, if they have seen it, there'll be a one. If they haven't seen it, there'll be a zero. So that's how we moved into this little data set. Um, Now, the third element, and this is where occupancy surveys can be multi-layered. They can generate multi-layered information. Though one must keep in mind that each additional set of information takes time, and you are probably risking exhausting the poor interviewee by every new question that you ask her or him. So it's always very important to take a call, maybe run a pilot and determine what are the key questions that one wishes to know. What is it that one wishes to know? Because if you sit there with the person for half a day, you might be able to ask like 500 different questions. How many of them are relevant? How many of them are not? I think it's a very important exercise to do before going out and completely executing your surveys. And um, again, it's not a big deal here to re-emphasize that under any circumstances, please try to keep the interviews as short as possible while making them more rich in conversation, because that's where you get to also notice the potential problems with accidental false positives that could be an issue. Um, So anyway, yeah, and there's a very beautiful slide that Muzaffar has put together, where he was able to explain how his data came through, and all the information that you collect through these interviews becomes invaluable because it can lead to fantastic assessments of species distribution, not just in current time, but even in the past. And that is not always the case with science surveys. Science surveys do not tell us how the situation was in the past, but people who've been living there for many years, they are our surveyors. They have been there 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, and they can sometimes provide extremely valuable data. So here again, as you can see, once you collect the information in the form, you'll see this is one of the forms that Muzaffar had collected. And in my understanding, this is the most time consuming and tricky step of transforming this data from the way it is in a data form to a sheet. Now, typically the detection history and survey covariates are collected together, which is why they often get organized simultaneously. Now, in this case, you will notice that AOK cells, the first column that you're seeing on the left-hand side, oops, this one, the rightmost column that you're seeing right now, that's the column which lists all the cells that are represented by each herder. In this case, I don't know, we see the name of I think I've taken it out by mistake, but the bottom line being each of these lines represent a different individual who was interviewed, and each person provided information about more than one cells that she or he was representing. Now, while Abhishek and Julia used similar methods, it was actually Muzaffar's data that helped us plan and discuss how to create an easy to replicate workflow. Because now what we have been able to do is, based on the way Muzaffar's data has come in, we now have a very simple series of steps in R which can help transform this data in the same format that it is from raw data to a presence compliant data to be analyzed. And here, if you look carefully, you have the covariates which are also listed, which could have potentially affected affected detection. In this case, their activity that they do, and also the age, sometimes the occupation. Um, Sometimes people end up with several occupation types. Any variable which is a categorical variable, it's a good practice to have fewer uh, uh, fewer but enough data in fewer categories, and that's where Muzaffar had kind of compiled them together. But once you have this data together, please remember the data on covariates that affect whether a species will use sampling unit or not typically come from GIS. And once you have these three data sets ready, then you're ready to run the codes that we had a walkthrough last week. And yeah, just to keep in mind, please ensure that the data is collected keeping in mind the way you plan to analyze it. It's very convenient at times to just do data mining and start exploring any possible relationships, but I think it always helps to have your questions set in advance and not go with this with the test everything approach. And Ian, he's the statistician. He can explain more about why it's a bad practice to do that. But just keep in mind that this is one of the reasons why it's a good practice to have your study planned in two phases, a pilot phase and the final phase.